How's it going, y'all? It's your boy Raymond back up in here with another video, and today we've got a special one because today is going to be the last video of 2024, and today we are going to be talking about my top 10 films of 2024. This video has been a grind to definitely put out. I've been trying to sort of watch as much stuff that I missed over the course of the year, and so I think I've finally sort of created enough of a concise list. And something that I think I'm satisfied with in terms of ranking and also what I think are my favorites of this year. So we're going to do the same thing that we did in my top 10 albums video. We're just going to go from the bottom at number 10 all the way to the top at number 1. And let's get started. Starting at number 10, we've got a film that I have talked about on this channel before. I think it's one of the more important films of this year, and given the events back in November, I think you can obviously see why. And I think the inclusion of this film, especially in retrospect, thinking about the impact that it left, or at least what little impact it did have after the results, I think it's interesting to see where this film is going to have a place in media and in pop culture, possibly in the future here. And I'm talking about the film The Apprentice.
In the world, Judy, in the world, it's going to be the finest building in the world. It's going to be a spectacular hotel. Absolutely spectacular.
You know, if this film really proved anything, it is that you really could make a film about somebody like a Donald Trump character and still have it be this interesting and explorative and also kind of non-biased view of the persona. I think Sebastian Stan does a really good job here of portraying him, and I think he does a really good job of not making the character too caricature-ish and actually really focusing more on the internal details behind the character. Jeremy Strong as Roy Cohn as well. I mentioned this a lot in the video that I did about the film, but he is really just like a powerful force as Roy Cohn, and I think the performances across the board of this film are really intriguing, and especially given how the election went and the reception of this film and the surprising minimal attention that it got when it first was released is a little bit surprising, but I think given the events of this year, I could see this film really sort of resurging over Trump's term, to be honest, and seeing this film sort of come to light over the course of time would be a really interesting case study and would definitely shed some light and piss a lot of people off, to be honest, over the course of the next 4 years. And I think that would be really interesting to see where this film will sit in the zeitgeist. Obviously, if you guys want to know more information on my thoughts on The Apprentice, you guys can go check out the video that I made about like a couple months ago when I saw the film. I really sort of dive deeper into like my thoughts and sort of the different aspects of the film in that video, so go ahead and check that out if you want more details. The Apprentice is at my number 10. This next film at number 9 was really something that I was a little shocked, but also like slightly disappointed by when I heard that it was first coming out. I was super excited by the casting, and I was super excited to see that there was going to be a follow-up to this beloved film that I think is one of the best action movies of all time. And so I was hesitant, but I was also extremely excited to see what a sequel and a follow-up and, or I guess technically in this case, a prequel would look like to this film. And even though it wasn't necessarily, you know, mind-blowing or anything like that, I still think that it's a great action piece and one of the best action films of this year. And I'm, of course, talking about Furiosa. There was like a little bit of controversy surrounding this film. I know people like weren't happy with the Chris Hemsworth casting, but I know a lot of people were excited about the Anya Taylor-Joy casting. I think Chris Hemsworth actually gives like a pretty interesting performance here, and I think it is something that is slightly out of like his comfort zone, but I also think it is him having like as much fun as possible and taking the character to new heights, especially. And this is a prequel technically to Mad Max Fury Road, which I think is one of the best action films of all time. And so obviously with the bar set so high for that film, I was interested and excited to see what this film was going to bring to the table in terms of the story, but also keeping in pace with the scope and the action and the process and the care that was put into Fury Road. I think Furiosa definitely sort of keeps in that that world, that scope. It definitely still has the George Miller style that we've all come to know and love since Mad Max. But I think where this film kind of falls a little bit short for me is really just kind of in the story. I think the film tends to kind of drag just a bit in terms of the plot. And in terms of keeping you really, really engaged with a lot of like the character dynamics and a lot of like plot structure and the story. I think the thing that made Fury Road so interesting and such like a breath of fresh air was just the fact that it was so simple. The entire film is basically just one giant chase sequence for like an hour and a half. Keeping in tune with that, this film is sort of trying to flesh out the world of Mad Max while also having a lot of like the same action set pieces. And so trying to find that balance. This film is also longer than Fury Road as well, and trying to add so much to the world and trying to also balance the massive action set pieces and all of the choreography from Fury Road was definitely going to be a tall order. And, you know, unfortunately, I think that the story aspect and the fleshing out of the world, or at least fleshing out of her story, I think falls short a little bit. I think the performances overall, though, are really great. I think Anya does a fantastic job as Furiosa, and she seems pretty believable as a younger Charlize Theron. And I think overall, it just has like a dedication that you don't necessarily see in new action films anymore, which I think is really nice. And I think it is probably the best action film of this year, I guess you could say. And so I think it's commendable enough for that. Now, this next film is really sort of where we get into a different realm in terms of the styling of film and also sort of the genre that we're going to be diving into. This film is by a director who has been on my radar for a while now. I just recently did earlier this year, I did like a whole binge of some of his earlier films. And especially some of the stuff that he did over in Greece. I think he has one of the most interesting visions and one of the most interesting directing styles of any working director right now. I think he is one of the best working directors right now. And I am talking about Kinds of Kindness, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos.
Yeah, I'm ready for the news. Yeah, I'm ready for the truth. And I always make it
Kinds of Kindness, of course, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. This is fairly recent, obviously, from the success of Poor Things. This only came out about a year after, and supposedly they made the film like sort of back to back as they were making Poor Things. And so this kind of has like an interesting sort of connection to that. Obviously, the cast is incredibly similar. It is pretty much like the same cast that was from Poor Things, minus obviously Jesse Plemons. But I think the thing that makes this so interesting is just the fact that it is so separate from Poor Things. And I actually quite enjoy sort of like this almost like Wes Anderson style of structure where you have three different stories that somehow are interlinked or exist in sort of like this mood, or I guess sort of in the same place and time. And it's interesting to see how Yorgos definitely plays with that. They're three very loosely connected stories, but I think each one has its own sort of distinct vision, and I think they all sort of serve their own purpose, and they all represent something that is very individual. And to see that, and to see three very distinct different kinds of stories combined into one film, creates this really crazy collage. I think where it does have some of the comparisons to Poor Things, I guess you could say, is in a lot of like the psychosexual aspects, a lot of these relationships between whether it's lovers or whether it's between people where there is a disconnect in power dynamics. I think that's a really big theme throughout a lot of Yorgos's work, and this is definitely no different, especially in the first film where Jesse Plemons is essentially like a errand boy for William Dafoe, which I think is really funny. And I think progressively each of the stories along the film get more and more weird and get to a place where you're really sort of digging into a lot more of like the art film kind of experimental aspects of things. But I think overall the package is really fun. And, this film obviously is long. It's about, a little over 2.5 hours. But I think because it is separated into the 3 distinct stories, you kind of get like these little chapters that you can sit through. And it's almost kind of like you're watching a little almost like a TV show, but all put into one film. And I think that's quite nice. And I think the film structure actually works in its favor here. And yeah, overall, I think the performances are really good, obviously. I think the direction is interesting. I think the only thing where this kind of falls flat is just the fact that it does feel like it was made sort of as like a small little side passion project. Obviously, a lot of the worlds and a lot of the stories could be more fleshed out if given the time. And a lot of like the character dynamics and the world building could be more fleshed out if given the time as well. But because this was made on the side between the grandiose production of something like a Poor Things, it's pretty cool to see that this film still has and still carries the quality that you would get from a Yorgos film. Now, the next film after this, we're going to be diving even more into sort of the more sort of independent film realm, and this film was definitely was something that I saw pretty early on in the year and still kind of stuck around and had a certain place that I really enjoyed. This was a director that I really got to sort of dive into a little bit earlier in the year and late last year. And he is still somebody that I want to explore even more. And hopefully I get the chance maybe in 2025 to sort of dive into more of his back catalog because I think he has a very distinct style. And I think he has one of the most interesting directing styles as well as the most interesting filmography that I've seen. And he's also just happens to have directed one of my favorite films of all time, Paris, Texas. I have the shirt right here, of course. And of course, I'm talking about Perfect Days, directed by Wim Wenders.
Just a perfect day.
Perfect Days is definitely one of those films where it'll kind of be like a hit or miss for you. The slow film style aspect of it is definitely going to be something that could turn a lot of people off. But if you really just sort of give it a chance and let the film sort of sit with you, I think it'll really have a profound effect. And I think the main performance by Koji is just really incredible. I was lucky enough to see the film with a Q&A with Koji and with Wim there. That was actually moderated by Willem Dafoe, which was just a huge surprise when I first saw that. And so to hear him talk about it and to hear sort of like the simplicity and the authenticity of the story behind this film was really nice and was also just like really inspiring of how simple the concept is. It's just this guy who, he just wanted to make a story essentially about a guy who cleans toilets and gets to sort of experience like the lulls and the minuscule dramas of like everyday life. Obviously, the character is somewhat fleshed out in terms of the relationship that he has with his daughter, and also sort of the relationship that he has with the other people that he goes to work with and that he experiences in everyday life. I think the film just sort of really shines in just the simplicity of that. It's not really sort of reaching for anything beyond that as well. It totally understands the lane that it's in. And I think that is really sort of like the grab of this film and really something that makes it lasting, at least in my opinion. I think the only thing that sort of keeps this film a little bit lacking is I just kind of wish that maybe like the world and maybe these characters were fleshed out a little bit more. We got a little bit more time to experience sort of like these characters and what their motivations are. That would be my number one complaint for the film, would just be I wanted more, and I wanted to understand more of like the dynamics between these characters. And I wanted to sort of understand people's motivations. Even though the main performance by Koji is very good, I just wish that he had more to work with in terms of what his motivations were, what the characters really mean. It is what it is, and I think just the simplicity of the film is very cute, and I think it is definitely a highlight of this year. Now, sticking with the theme of independent film, this next film was sort of one that was a little bit on my radar and that I wasn't extremely looking forward to, except when I originally saw sort of like some scenes from Drive My Car. Those scenes were definitely a little bit shocking. I took like a film class in which my professor essentially like spoiled the film a little bit for me towards the end and showed some scenes from the film for Drive My Car, and I was just blown away by the performances, and I was really just blown away by the writing of it. And, you know, I still have not seen Drive My Car, which is just insane. I think it's just unfortunately one of those things where it has been spoiled for me, so I just haven't really been encouraged to go and actually finish the full thing just because I already know what it's really about. I even wrote like a paper about it and did like some research on the film itself, even though I haven't even seen it. But I think Hamaguchi is such an interesting director, and I would love to see a lot of his previous work outside of Drive My Car and outside of this film right here. And I'm of course talking about Evil Does Not Exist. Now, I know some people are going to say that this is technically a 2023 film, but I did see it this year because it did come out in Japan beforehand and not in the US until the beginning of this year. So I am going to count it in terms of like US release date for my top 10s for the films and also for music as well. I guess I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video, but it's fine. So yeah, so I do count this for 2024. If anything, it's like kind of a small film, but because it is small, the scope of it just feels so much bigger. Really, this sort of idea of power dynamics and almost kind of like this interesting sort of intersection of like capitalism that is going on in this story, but this is also happening in like Japan, which I think is very interesting. Very down to earth film, especially given that with the clips that I have seen and with the knowledge that I do know of Drive My Car, that film felt so big in its scope, and this film really feels very much more down to earth. But the way that the story is told and the way that the story really unfolds by the end is just incredibly shocking and incredibly well handled. If anybody knows about Hamaguchi's style, you know, he is kind of about that Asian slow cinema kind of style. I think this film is really sort of where, you know, it's just the camera is so stationary throughout, and you really get the sense that he is drawing out the day-to-day aspects of these characters. And so you really get to sit with a lot of the characters in this film and get to understand their day-to-day activities, their lifestyles, and it impacts even more when you start to see how their lifestyles and their way of living is affected by these bigger companies coming in and sort of changing things and wanting to take over the village in a sense. And it's a very interesting case study, and it almost feels like it's a story that has been told for centuries, but is something that is in such a small scale in this film, and yet it resonates with so many people, and it resonates throughout cinema history as the story has been told many times. And to see it in this form is really interesting and is really specific to something like a Hamaguchi story. I heard that this was based off of a true story as well. It seems completely believable, and it seems like it is something that is true and very honest. It doesn't seem like something that is reaching for anything more that it is. That is definitely not really Hamaguchi's style. You know, he's very down to earth, and he's very much sort of about these way of life films. And this is definitely no different. The thing that I will say, I guess that maybe, you know, detracted me a little bit from the film is just the fact that it is of that Asian slow cinema kind of styling. So it does take a little bit of time for the film to really settle in and for you to really grasp what the film is trying to say and really sort of like the overall story of the film. But I think either way, it is something that is truly special, and I hope to see Drive My Car one day. And I hope to go see his back catalog because I know he is a very respected director, not only in Japan, but also in the US. And I can't wait to explore more of his work. Now, this next film is going to be taking a complete 180. This film is so massive in scope. I mean, it's literally set in space and this mythology. When I saw this early on in the year, I was really thinking that this was going to set up for a solid year going into 2024. And while that wasn't all that necessarily true, I think early on in this year, when this came out, along with some of the other films that came out earlier in the spring, this really sort of was a big momentum push going into 2024. To see the scale and the scope of this film, especially with the fact that it is a sequel, I think is very impressive. And I think this director, seeing some of his older films later in the year over the summer, I think it's really interesting to see the growth of this director, and it's interesting to see the direction that he's taken with this series. And I'm of course talking about Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. You know, I think you'll really be hard-pressed to sort of find a film that came out this year that feels even bigger than this one. Although I think there might be a film in my top 3 that will give it a run for its money. Dune is really something that is quite special in terms of the zeitgeist of today, in terms of like a lot of these sci-fi trilogies that a lot of these directors try to make, or these like grand epic scale films. I'm looking at you, Zack Snyder. You know, a lot of them tend to sort of fall flat just because they focus so much on the epicness and the huge scale and just all of like the special effects and the CGI and the world building, that they sort of lose track of the story, and they lose track of the thing that is really going to be pulling people into the film. And I think Denis understands this, and I think he understands what spectacle is. And when you mix that with the storytelling aspects of film, then I think it really creates something special. I know obviously he's kind of like an interesting topic right now because of his comments about how like he hates dialogue and all of this other stuff. Truly, I think this film, you know, really sort of speaks to the way that it is able to balance its main story with the grand scale of it all, and the aspects of the world building, especially. I mean, obviously this is a part 2, so you already have a lot of that world set up for you in the first one, and this, if anything, just adds on to it, which I think is really incredible. And I think seeing how the characters progress and seeing how they evolve over the course of these 2 films is really special. And I'm hoping that, you know, in the next one, I'm not sure which story that they're going to go with. I know obviously the TV show is out as well. I think what's special about this one is just the fact that Denis was able to conclude the story on such a high note, and was able to carry over the ambition, and was able to carry over the quality from the first one, and expand on it in a way that wasn't overwhelming and didn't take away from the story in this one. And so I think for that, I absolutely commend him, and I think this film is probably the best sci-fi film of this year. Now with number 4, with this next film, we're going to be taking another big 180, and this is going to be another independent drama that I really, really loved from this year. I was so excited. I had been excited since this was announced like over a year ago. But this is a director that, you know, has been on my radar for a long time, since I was in high school. The way that he crafts his films, the way that he does everything himself, he's a true auteur of our time. And I think he's truly a director that is very inspirational, not only for me, but for a lot of young filmmakers. And I'm talking about Anora, directed by Sean Baker. Now, I know the placement of Anora is going to seem kind of surprising for a lot of people, especially with the glowing praise that I gave it in my review video that I made for Anora. I think the thing that was interesting that really sat with me in this film was just how interesting sort of like the character dynamics were. I think at first I really just fell in love with the fact that there was like a new Sean Baker, and that Mikey Madison was in it, and the performances were really great. I saw it a second time actually, and after seeing it a second time, I think the thing that lost me a tad bit was just how written the film kind of felt. It didn't quite have some of that Sean Baker flair, some of that spark that he really has in his other films, where you have these moments between characters, and you have these moments between characters who are also non-actors as well, and you have these like really interesting sparks. And I think because this film is full of a cast of people who are professional actors. Maybe you lose a little bit of that. Maybe you lose a little bit of that spontaneity. Honestly, I mean, I think this is still like one of the best films of this year. If you guys want to know my full thoughts on the film, you can obviously go watch my Anora film review on the channel. But, you know, I think the thing that is really still special about Sean Baker is the fact that he's able to make these really small and these really contained films that are so glowing and that really resonate with people, especially me. And so inspiring to see somebody who is so committed to the craft and who is able to make these really, really low budget films and is still able to get the recognition that he is. I think that's super inspiring, especially to somebody like me who is a young filmmaker. I just saw Tangerine for the first time earlier in the year. You know, he shot that whole thing for like nothing and shot it on his iPhone and on a scooter just around LA. And I think that is extremely inspiring. And I think that film is fantastic. And I saw Florida Project when I was in high school, and I thought that was fantastic as well. He just keeps putting out quality projects that I think really sort of say a lot about culture, and I think have something to say in terms of what filmmaking can be when given in the hands of somebody who really has the care and puts in the effort themselves, and who can really do it all. Now, this next film, oh boy. This next film I just saw very recently, about a week before Christmas. I need to make a whole video on this film because, wow. This is by a director who I had not seen their previous work, except because I did see a film that they had acted in earlier this year that I thought was phenomenal. And I did not know that they were an actor beforehand. I just happened to see one of their signature roles that they had acted in earlier this year. This film is a lot of things. I'll definitely have to make a separate video on this film. The scope, and talk about epic scale of it all, you know, when talking about Dune, this film, I think, takes the idea of scale and takes the idea and the gravitas and the scope of everything. This film kind of does it in a new way and in a whole other level that isn't necessarily sci-fi, but is something that is so powerful and is just this grand scale epic. Somehow he pulled it off in 3.5 hours. I don't know how, and with only $10 million, which is just mind-blowing to me. And I'm, of course, talking about The Brutalist, directed by Brady Colbert. This film is just insane. I mean, the scope, the scale, the performances, the writing, the story, the look of the film. I mean, the whole thing just pops like right at you. Obviously, if you guys have heard of the story, you know, this was shot on VistaVision, which hasn't been used, I think, since like the 50s or 60s. Brady Colbert, who I mentioned was an actor beforehand, I recently just saw him in the film Mysterious Skin, and I thought that film was absolutely fantastic. And to see him as a director and to do this film is just insane. Like, this guy has so much range and he has so much capability as a director, and he gets so much out of the performances. I think Adrian Brody should be nominated for an Oscar. First of all, I think his performance is absolutely fantastic. It gives me a lot of the same feeling from his performance from The Pianist, obviously. I'm sure that's going to be tossed around as a comparison for this film. Felicity Jones, I think, was really shocking, and she was fantastic in this film. And I didn't really have any expectations for what her role was going to be, but the way that they set up her character and the way that they introduce her into the story is so well done and is just so great, the way that it's built up. And I think her performance just is absolutely incredible. I think both of them together have some amazing chemistry. And also Guy Pearce. Guy Pearce just came out of nowhere for me. Such an evil, disgusting role, you know, is really, really breathtaking. And you truly believe that he is sort of like this internal monster later on in the film on screen. You know, he is just, his presence is massive, and I think it's really fantastic. I think all the performances in this film are fantastic. I can't believe that this was made on $10 million. Like, the look of it, the fact that it's about like architecture and they're building a lot of this stuff in the sets, and the fact that it's shot on film nonetheless, you know, it's just, it's just so inspiring. In the same way that Anora, made on such a small budget was inspiring for that film, the fact that you could do a 3.5 hour epic scale film like this and have it only cost $10 million is really something that, Hollywood should be taking note of. Brady isn't exactly like a massive name in terms of, directors in Hollywood. And yet he got the financing for this film and he was able to make it with the money that he had and the way that he wanted to make it. And I think that's incredibly inspiring. And I think for that reason alone, it deserves to be talked about. I'm going to make my own video on the film so that I can dive in more into a lot of the details. But yeah, this film is just incredible. For anybody who hasn't seen it, or for anybody who is daunted by the 3.5 hour runtime, I still recommend going to see it. I think the film is incredibly well paced. And I think the film just has some of the best performances of the year easily. But yeah, it's just incredible. And I think it is something that deserves to be seen in the theater. I'm surprised that I didn't really put it as my number one, but you guys will see in the next two where I stand on those films. But maybe in like the next month or two, if I was to see it again, I think this could be my number one film of this year. I just think it's that good. Now, this next film at number 2, it came out on Christmas. It had been built up for so long and I had waited so long to see it. I tried like 4 or 5 times to get screeners for this film, couldn't get one, had to wait all the way till Christmas. And let me tell you, it was worth the wait because this director, I think, is one of the best working directors right now. I just recently saw his first film, The Witch, in IMAX a couple months ago. This guy is just awesome. And I think this film is really, really something that it's just another film in this guy's filmography that is going to stand the test of time, I think, and is going to be something that hopefully people are raving about. And I am, of course, talking about Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. This film is just absolutely mental. Everything from the production design, from the sets, the costumes, the practical effects, like everything is just done to a T. And I was definitely so excited for the buildup of this. And especially, I've seen every Eggers film up to this point, and to see him get to this point as a director where I really enjoyed The Northman, but I think The Lighthouse was really, truly like his masterpiece. And to see him do some of these more, I guess you could say like commercial-ish, films, is definitely something that is interesting, but it's just incredible to see that he's still able to retain the same amount of quality throughout all of his films. He's still able to have as much success in terms of getting performances out of people, making and writing these scripts that are interesting and that are dynamic and that flesh out the world building, and for these characters to really run around with is just insane. And I think the look of this film, the writing, the performances, I think they're all great. It was definitely worth the wait. The one thing that I will say though is that there are a few things that sort of bothered me a tad bit in terms of the writing sort of some of the characters. For anybody who hasn't seen like the original, it is very, very close in terms of the structure of the original. He's not taking too many liberties with the original story from the 1922 version, which is fair, but the liberties that he does take with the more psychosexual aspects, while I think they are interesting, they struggle a bit for me when going parallel with the Black Plague metaphor aspect of the film. It seems like there's sort of two parallel plots and two parallel versions of the story that are sort of clashing at moments. I think maybe if it was more about the psychosexual stuff instead of like the plague stuff and the rats and all of that sort of, very, very gothic aesthetic, then I think that could be interesting on its own. But to see them mixed, especially with the character as known as someone like Nosferatu, a lot of people tend to know the story. And so it's kind of hard to really mix the two. But I think the psychosexual aspects of the film are very interesting and are what is honestly worth watching about this film. Obviously, this is technically a remake of the original, with Eggers' vision, and he's had plenty of time to prep for this film. Obviously, you guys have probably seen in interviews that he's talked about how he put on a stage play of this in high school, and he even played Count Orlok himself. He had a very clear vision for what the film was going to be, and I think he executed that to his fullest. It is exactly what he wanted it to be, I think. Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok is just terrifying, and also I think the voice, I think the prosthetic, the mustache, the costume is just incredible, and I think it's really well done. I know people are going to be making edits of the film like online like crazy. I've already seen a whole bunch of memes from it. I think Lily Rose Depp just gives an incredible performance as well. I think Nicholas Hoult also gives a really good performance. Dafoe is obviously sort of doing his very general sort of like crazy scientist, mad old man kind of character, which is fine, but he obviously does very well at that. It seems like Dafoe and Eggers really like working together, which is really good, and I would love to see them work together continuously in the future. But yeah, this film is just non-stop, like so in your face, this feeling of dread that just is all over the entire film for the entire runtime, but also this like love triangle aspect of it too. I mean, I'm going to make my own video on it, so I'll really dive into the details in that. I just thought it was fantastic, and I just thought that it was really enjoyable, and I may even see it again. I saw it in IMAX on Christmas night, and I recommend that people go out and see it because it is really interesting, and it is really, if anything, I think it's actually quite fun watching it, and I think it's really interesting sort of diving into a lot of the dynamics and a lot of like the really crazy character design aspects of Count Orlok, and a lot of like the atmosphere that Eggers is able to build throughout the film as well. It's just really phenomenal and really fantastic. But my number one, this is a film that came out and when it came out earlier this year, obviously took sort of like everyone by storm. I mean, it really blew up, and I was definitely excited for it. I remember when they showed the initial sort of teaser image for the film, if you guys remember what I'm talking about, and I was like, whoa, this cast seems interesting, and also like it's directed by what I think is one of the more interesting directors working this year, and he also had 2 films come out this year as well. I know one of them didn't make my top 10, but I made a video on that film if you guys want to go check that out. And unfortunately, I didn't get to revive the channel when this film came out, which really sucks because I will regret forever not making a video on this film, because it is just such a fun time. I would love to watch it again, especially if it gets nominated for an Oscar. I hope it comes back into theaters because this film is just so much goddamn fun. Everything about it is just extremely solid, and it is my number 1 film of the year, and it is Challengers, directed by Luca Guadagnino. This image, you cannot tell me seeing that from like a Hollywood Reporter article a year ahead of time, and you're just like, oh no, that doesn't look cool. Like, what? That's the first image that you show? Crazy. This film is just so many things. I mean, I know everybody and their mother has probably like heard or seen the film. Everything from the incredible soundtrack by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, the performances by Zendaya, by Mike Feist, by Josh O'Connor. There's just so much chemistry throughout this entire film, whether it's with the filmmaking aspects of it, the editing blending with the character performances, the soundtrack coming in at specific moments when there's drama and tension. The idea that this film is really about tennis, but it's also not about tennis like at all. There's just so much going on, and it's just so much fun. Like the editing and the style makes it so enjoyable to watch, and you're just watching these characters try and like figure themselves out, and you watch them evolve over time, and yet they still stay the same. And there's so much drama and emotions that are left throughout all of these characters. I'm sure everybody already knows everything about this film by now, and it sucks that I didn't get to make its own video on it, but either way, it's still my number 1 film of this year, and I think it's just incredible. I didn't get to see it in IMAX, but hopefully if it does get nominated for the Oscars, they'll put it back in IMAX in theaters. That would be so fun to watch. I don't know, there's not a whole bunch more that I could say to praise this film. I guess the only thing that to strike against it a tad bit, I guess, is just sort of like the style and sort of the way that Luca likes to use different elements in his styling, just sort of make the film come off like a tad bit on the nose at times. I can understand, some of the dialogue beats, some of the ways that the editing is used in order to create tension or in order to create moments of shock and awe. It can be a little much, a little overcooked at times. And I think the way that the soundtrack is used can be a little overwhelming at times as well, when it sort of takes over some of the dialogue in some certain scenes. All of it is with a purpose, and all of it is keeping in tune with this very specific tone and this very specific style that Luca is going about on this film. And the atmosphere that is built across this entire runtime is phenomenal. And I think it's one of the most consistent films of this year in terms of its tone and the way that it handles itself. I don't know. There's like not much more I could say. It is definitely my favorite film of this year. And if you still have not seen it, go see it. It is so much fun. Probably don't go take your parents to go see it. I don't even know if I would recommend taking like a date to go see it necessarily. I don't know if it's that kind of movie either. Watch it on your own if you must, and just have a fun time. Watch it with your friends. Make a drinking game out of it, because it is just such a fun time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my top 10 films of 2024. Obviously, I know you guys were kind of surprised by some of the picks, I'm sure. If you guys haven't seen all of the films on this list, you guys should definitely go check them out. I'm sure a decent majority of them are on streaming or in theaters right now. And so, yeah, thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of the views, and I appreciate you guys. I really sort of put a lot into reviving the channel, and I'm going to put even more into keeping the channel going throughout 2025. And so I really wanted to give you guys sort of my full thoughts and the full experience of what I thought about these films. There's still more to come. I mean, I'm probably going to try to make the Nosferatu video. Definitely going to be making the Brutalist review video as well. And just, yeah, there's so much more to talk about, and there's so much more that's going to be coming out, but I just knew that I had to get this out before New Year's. And so here it is, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe down below, and go ahead and toss your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys think about my list, which films I didn't include that maybe you think I should check out, or which films are some of your favorites of this year. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I appreciate you guys so much for watching my videos this year, and I appreciate you guys so much for subscribing. And yeah, I think it's just amazing that I've been able to grow even more with reviving the channel, and it's only going to continue through next year. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in 2025.